Okay, I propose that we start. Good evening, everyone, or good afternoon, or good morning. I don't know where you are sitting. Welcome to this third and last session in our series of 3 live chats on the theme of thriving in turbulence. My name is Carine Peeters. I'm a professor in strategy at Vlerick Business School. And today I have the pleasure to be joined on stage by my colleague, Kerstin Fehre. But we actually have the entire band in the room, I believe, because I also saw that my colleagues from earlier sessions, Kurt, Martin, Philip, and Leonardo are also in the room. So good evening to you as well. Thank you for joining. So what we would like to do today with you for this kind of closing session is do a little bit of looking forward, looking into what could our strategies for the next normal or new normal, what could those strategies look like? And maybe even more importantly, I would say, how can we even think about strategy when things are still so uncertain around us? So Kerstin, you will hear from her in a minute, and you will discover that, well, she's a professor in strategy as well, but she is our expert, among other things, in strategic decision making. And this is going to be the topic, or at least one of the big topics of tonight. How can we make decisions in those uncertain times? And maybe also good to know about Kerstin is that before joining academia, she actually had her 2 hands in the world of practice. She worked for Bankhaus Metzler, Goldman Sachs, and BASF. So it's a bit the best of both worlds together with Kerstin. And maybe just one word on myself. You will also discover a bit more about my interest and expertise in a moment. But I guess the best way to summarize it is that what started out maybe as an intuition, as more and more, I've become more and more convinced of that, which is that companies not only need a strategy and they need to be able to execute it correctly, but they also need to be able to evolve their strategy over time. And this is why I've kind of made of strategic flexibility and adaptation one of my core areas and core topics in the last few years, whether it is in research, in teaching, or in the workshops that I facilitate for our corporate clients. Now just one word on technicalities or practicalities before we start. Those of you who were in previous sessions, you know already, but basically all communication channels and features that Zoom allows, they are open. So please, for those of you who want, share your video. We love to see who we have in the room. The chat box is also open. We will facilitate the chat box during the entire session. So don't wait until the end if you want to ask a question, if you want to share your experience with the topic, please feel free to use the chat box. But you can also use your mic, so do not hesitate to unmute and just participate more directly in the conversation. We would love that as well. Maybe the only thing about the mic, it might be better that when you do not wish to speak, you just put it on mute so that we avoid background noise as much as possible. But for the rest, again, a warm invitation to participate in the conversation if you want. Now, strategy for the day after. I think one of the important points for us tonight is that what our strategies are going to look like for the day after. That has a lot to do whether we're going to look at COVID-19 and the current crisis more as an opportunity or as a threat for our business. And to get us started, I would like to actually start from your experience with this, and we have created a little poll to take the temperature in the room on that question. So, threat or opportunity, if you think about how your organizations have looked and has treated the COVID-19 crisis so far, would you say that the mood around is mostly that this is a threat or this is an opportunity? Or maybe you're still wondering and not quite sure yet what to make of this current crisis. I'll give you a few more seconds to decide. We still have a few votes coming in. And let me now end the poll and I will share the results with you. Very interesting results, I would say. The mood is positive today. Most of you, I don't know if it has been the case since the beginning of the crisis or whether this is something that has developed and evolved over time. But apparently the majority, 52% of you, do look at this current crisis as an opportunity. Maybe you're looking into new business ideas, new things you could do to even better serve your customers, or maybe you have found new markets that you would be able to serve. And I also see that 31% of you are still not quite sure yet. And I would say from my side, I'm not that surprised of that. And why do I see that I'm not that surprised of that? Because I guess there are certain industries where it's hard to imagine how you could look at this current crisis in any other way than just a huge threat that we need to protect against. And I guess the airline industry, and this is an example that Martin already shared in the first session, in the airline industry, it's probably hard to see anything else than just a big threat. Now, there are also other sectors, other activities where I would say that the crisis is turning into a real gold mine. If we take the example here of Genmark, it's an American company. They are specialized in tests and diagnosis for respiratory diseases. They have been listed in the top 5 of diagnostic kits, test kits for COVID-19. So as you can imagine, they have no worry about their sales for this year and probably also no worry for their sales for the years to come. So those are 2 examples of industries and then activities where probably it's quite clear in which direction it is going. But I would say that for the majority of businesses, the majority of sectors of activity, it's much more unclear. And this big uncertainty and unclarity, interestingly, generates all kind of different reactions. And I would say that some of those reactions, they actually turn into bold moves from some organizations, and not just bold moves, but sometimes also very kind of positive, opportunity-driven moves, like maybe some of those ideas that you have in mind when you, or that you were having in mind when you answered our first poll. So just to give you one example, I don't know if you know BSIT. BSIT is a company that offers basically a platform to connect well, busy parents with babysitters. As you can imagine, when we were in lockdown and no one can come to your house, I can tell you that in just one day, their entire babysitting business was shut down. Now they had 2 options. Either they could put their entire team on temporary unemployment, or they could kind of reallocate all their brain power to basically do something else. And this is what they did. So they decided that there was a side project that they were considering maybe to work on sometimes when they would have time. But what they did is that they shifted the entire company, the entire team to actually work on that new project. And in just a couple of weeks, they were able to come up with at least a pilot version of a new business, a new type of service that they're going to offer to parents. And now they're actually in the phase of going to investors to raise money for their business. And we see those kind of examples in all industries. We have another example here in financial services with Econopolis, where they also took advantage of the crisis to launch a new business of a fully digital wealth management business. We see that in restaurants as well, where we have very high stars restaurants completely turning their concept upside down. So this is really happening in all industries. And we are certainly not going to argue that all of us, we should kind of be busy with reinventing ourselves. We actually got some questions from you as we were preparing the session. Do we really need to change? Do we really need to reinvent ourselves? Well, maybe not. That's certainly not what we're going to argue. Not everyone needs to go down that path. But the two questions that we would like to discuss in this context, the first one is, why is it in the first place that confronted with the same uncertainty, the same shock, the same crisis, some people do see primarily threats, whereas other people would see opportunities? And from there, well, given that it is a case, this is a fact, what can we do such as we can turn that as much as possible to a positive outcome for our companies? And I will first give the floor to Kerstin to address the first question and about why is it that we do see things differently, and what might be some of the biases that might be at play in here. So Kerstin, with no further ado, I'm going to give you the floor to take on the first part of the session.
Okay. So do you all see my screen now? So it should, well, normally it should not really change.
Yep.
So thank you, Carine. What I would like to do now in the next 15-20 minutes is to have a little bit a different view on whether we perceive this current crisis as an opportunity or rather as a threat. And I think so far we have mainly focused on the industry level. But as Carine already pointed out, even within industries, there might be differences, yeah? That some people might rather consider this as an opportunity, make something out of it, whether others are completely in this threat modus and try to defend their self or their companies. So I would like to now have a closer look at our personal role as decision makers, as individuals. What is our role in perceiving this rather as a threat or opportunity, and then also especially in our personal role in the decision-making process. So in this current situation, due to COVID-19, a lot of firms have to reconsider their strategy. They have to reevaluate it, and they have to maybe make new strategic decisions, and they struggle. So did you actually know that we make about approximately 20,000 decisions per day? So we could be called decision-making experts. But still, we normally struggle to make decisions, and especially strategic decisions. So why is it so difficult to make a strategic decision? Well, the difficulties lay mainly in the, let's say, in the time dimension of strategy. So when we talk about strategy, about our strategy, we position the firm today for the future, but the future is unknown. It comes with unpredictability, disruption, complexity, as we currently realize, maybe even more than normally. And as the future is unknown, we have to base our decision-making on assumptions. And in all these assumptions, we have our individual biases, and especially we are afraid of making a bad decision. So here, I would like to come back to one of the slides that also one of my colleague Martin already shared during the first webinar or the first live chat. And especially here to point your attention to the second quote, namely, everyone is afraid of making a mistake, but the greatest error is not to move. The greatest error is to be paralyzed by the fear of failure. And here I might already have good news for you, because one of the biases that we have when it comes to decision making in general is called the outcome bias. So one of the, let's say, mistakes that we normally make is that we evaluate our decisions based on the outcome. Once we see the result or the outcome of our decision, maybe several weeks, months, or years later, we say, oh yes, this was a good decision. Or we say, this was not the best, or this was actually a wrong decision. But actually, this is our first bias that we have. So what we, between the time of decision making and the outcome of the decision, there are so many things happening in between. So many things that are not under our control, that we cannot influence, and that we also cannot foresee. So then it does not make sense to evaluate the outcome, but rather we should evaluate the decision itself in the moment of decision making. And this we can only do based on the process of decision making. So in the moment that we take the decision, we should ask ourselves, is it a good or a bad decision? Did we follow a good or a bad process? But in order to improve our process, or to be able to say, yes, this was a good process, we first have to understand how we make decisions. And therefore, I would like to have a look together with you at the ideal type of decision making. So first of all, we follow normally 3 steps: the issue identification, the issue interpretation, and the decision making. So first of all, we have to realize there is something going on. So we have to identify the issue and be aware that this might have an influence on our strategy. Then we have to make something with this piece of information that we identified, and then only then we can make a decision. So while this is quite theoretical, let's rather fill it with an example and have a closer look at each of these steps, and especially also have a look at what kind of biases we might have in each of these steps. So normally when it comes to issue identification is we are surrounded by millions of information. There's always too much information. This has always been the case. This has nothing to do with social media. This has always been the case. There's much more information than we can digest. And also even with now all the great technologies like automated intelligence and so on, there will always be much more information than we can digest. So we first have to identify the issues to look at. And how does this normally work? Well, these is like glasses. We put our glasses on there, and these are our cognitive filters that are then decisive on whether we realize, oh, there's something going on, whether we realize it earlier than others, or whether we completely ignore it. And these glasses, these cognitive filters, they are really influenced by a lot of different factors, like the situation, like the time we have, like how often do we hear about it, and so on and so on. But this is also really highly influenced by our own personality, by our education, by our cognition, by our experience, our values, culture, and so on. For example, I just recently talked to a friend of mine. She studied, or she's a medical doctor. And she said, already like 15 years ago, 20 years ago, during my studies, we all learned that there will be a next pandemic. So they were just waiting for it. Since the Spanish flu, they were apparently waiting for it. And if you learn something like this in your education, you will then probably be more sensitive towards this kind of information like COVID-19 or coronavirus. There's a new virus. And the same for experience. Now that we all experience this, we might also be next time a little bit more sensitive when it comes to these kind of information. So what I'd like to do with you, like a little bit, I would like to encourage you also to reflect a little bit upon your own situation. So when did you hear first time about COVID-19 or coronavirus? And by when did you actually really realize that this might influence your business and your personal life? Was it already end of December when the first information was spread in internet and social media? Was it maybe mid-January when it really entered the newspapers, the European newspapers? Was it end of February, beginning of March, when we all came back from ski vacation and realized, there's something going on and also coming to Europe? Or was it only like early March, mid-March, when restaurants were closed, schools were closed, that we realized, oh wow, this has an impact on our daily life, something far away happening around us. So I would like to share my own personal experience with you, and also like use this example to illustrate a little bit the different biases that we might have. So in my case, I heard about COVID-19 really the first time mid of January. It was a Thursday, I still remember. It was a Thursday. In the morning I checked as normally all the newspapers online, and there was one of these tabloid newspapers, a German one with a big headline, already one person died in China due to a new virus. What did I do? I thought, like, completely ignore it. It's a tabloid newspaper. It is just normal. They are always exaggerating. So I didn't really think about it. In the afternoon, my mother called me and asked me, will you still travel to China? I was supposed to travel to China end of March with our students, with a group of 45 students for 4 weeks to China. What was my reaction? I said, oh, come on, it's mid of January. We will leave end of March. How many people do live in China? Where is it? It is far away from where we want to go to. How many people normally die due to a normal influenza, and so on and so on. So I really said, like, come on, I ignore it. Next day at the office, I talked to my colleague with whom I'm normally organizing this, this trip, and she came to my office and we both quickly discussed it and we both agreed, yes, there's something going on, but it will not really harm our trip. We don't have to think about it now. So what happened actually in my case? Well, although I should know better, I was actually a victim of my own confirmation bias. Yeah? I was sure and convinced that I will travel to China, so that all the facts that I was considering and taking into account was like how many people normally die to a normal influenza, and so on and so on. So I really tried to just see the fact that confirm my beliefs rather than other objective facts. So what happened then? Friday evening, my husband asked me, are you still considering traveling to China? I was like, And it is, I think the same evening I received a WhatsApp from my colleague Martin and asked myself, do you think that this might have an influence on your trip to China? So I must admit, I started to think twice. I said, okay, maybe I should have a closer look at it. And so now I had this piece of information. Normally, what do we do when we have this piece of information? We have to give it form and meaning. So it's an issue interpretation. So then, due to our human being, we put it into boxes. Important, unimportant, risky, harmless, good, bad, opportunity, or threat. And only then when we are able to put it into these boxes, we are then able to make our decision. And here again, our cognition, our personality plays an important role in which box we put it. Yeah? So whether we are rather risk averse, whether we are rather like future oriented and think, come on, we can influence the future, and so on and so on. A lot of things, and again, experience, education have a lot of influence in which box we put it. And this is actually also the reason you might know this, why two people that are in the same room have access to the same kind of information, the same level of information, have a completely different understanding of the situation. Yeah, just think about one of the last business meetings you might have had together with your colleagues. They have the same kind of information. They just had were in the same room, and you're discussing afterwards with them, and you ask yourself, have they been in the same meeting as I have been? So this comes again to our personality. So, well, then what did I do? I did spend the whole weekend and reading the newspaper, checking online. I listened to, I think, every single radio documentation about this virus. I listened to a lot of experts. So I tried to really figure out, okay, what do I have to do with this? Do I have to take it into consideration or not? And what happened actually? So I think from the very first moment, I did put it in this unimportant box, and then it popped out again. And then, yeah, so I said, okay, now I have to think twice in which box I will put this. And here again, well, we have a lot of biases. Yeah? One of the biases is, for example, called the expert bias. Yeah? So it really has an influence from who we receive an information. Yeah? In my case, like the very first moment, this tabloid newspaper, I ignored it. And then, well, of course, the amount of repeating question, and then also from whom do these questions come from, has an influence, and then also the expert bias in this case, or we have other biases like gender biases, or the hello effect, or good-looking people, we rather believe that they're right, and so on and so on. And here with the expert bias, yeah, just to illustrate you this, it's, well, if your neighbor tells you spam will be solved within 2 years, we might think, what is he talking about? But if Bill Gates tells us spam will be solved within 2 years, we all believe this. But unfortunately, Bill Gates said this in 2006. So we are still waiting for the solution. Yeah? And also now, this is something that we see in the current situation. We currently see a lot of experts. We all know the names of the big virologists. We've never seen them before, but we try to incorporate their opinion in our decision-making. Yeah, and then only when we did put this into these boxes, we are then able to make our decision. And we know from a lot of research that this box is decisive on which decision we are going to. So if we decide this is an opportunity, we go then rather for proactive behavior. If this is a threat, it's rather defensive, it's reactive. In the case of opportunity, we try to make something out of it. We try to gain money with it. In the case of a threat, we rather try to protect ourselves and just try to minimize our risk of losing money. So two completely different answers to maybe the same problem. So let's have a look at how good we are in decision making. I would like to do a little exercise with you. So I think we are all a little bit stressed due to the current situation. Yeah, kids were probably at home, all working from home, a lot of extra things to do that we never had to think about. So I think we all are looking forward to our holidays, and maybe we would like to have a little bit more holidays than normally. So, and now you can choose. So we have the possibility to select one of the following alternatives. Which one do you choose? So the option 1 or option A would be with a probability of 90%, you win 1 week of additional holiday. And option B is with a probability of 40%, you win 3 weeks of additional holidays. And I'll quickly open the poll so that you can share for which option you would like to go. Here it comes. So rather 90%, 1 week of additional holiday, or 40%, 3 weeks of additional holiday. So I think, well, the majority voted. I will quickly share the results. And we see, yeah, there's a slight preference for 1 week of additional holidays. And so a little bit more than 50% would go for this 1 week of additional holidays with a probability of 90%. Okay, so yeah, let's have a look at another opportunity or another possibility. So now you have 2 different options. With a probability of 9%, you win 1 week of additional holiday. Or with a probability of 4%, you win 3 weeks of additional holidays. And I will open up again a poll. Stop. Oops. Wait a moment. It is so holiday 2. And here we go. Which option do you choose now? Yeah, I think the majority voted, so let's have a look at it. And I can already say that now the result is much clearer. Yeah? So really the majority would go for a little bit riskier situation, but 3 weeks of additional holidays. So what happened actually? So this is something that we see quite often in decision sciences, and this is actually called the Allais bias or Allais paradox, because Mr. Allais did find it out first time. So let's have a look. So we switched. So here in the first setting, we said we prefer, not all of you, but a little bit more than half of you said like, well, I prefer the probability of 90%, the utility of 1 week, rather than with a probability of 40%, the utility of 3 weeks additional vacation. And in the second case, we said like, no, we rather prefer with 4%, the utility of 3 weeks than with a probability of 9%, the probability of 1 week. And now we have this mathematical equation. And if we try to put one side to the other side, it looks like this. Yeah, so we all divide by 0.9 or 0.0.9. And in the first situation, it would look like this. And in the second situation, it looks like this. So what we see here we have exactly the same on both sides, the same, but we have a change in the signs here. And this is something completely human and normal, but from a mathematical perspective, it's not logical, yeah? Because while we see on the one side, we prefer the one over the other, but still on both sides, we have the same. But this is something that Mr. Allais found out, that in the case of high probabilities, we tend to think like 80%, 85, 90%, 95, almost sure. So I rather go for the almost sure option, although it might be not that good as the other option. But if we see very small probabilities, we rather say, it is so small, come on, it's so unsecure, then I go for the riskier one, but still at the end, I might get better outcome. You know? So it's completely normal and human, but this might also have an influence, for example, if we talk about our new business plan. Yeah? If there's something with 90%, we might rather go for it. And we still have to be aware of this bias in our decision making. Okay.
Guess
so
maybe that would be a good moment to actually share one of the comments in the chat box where Marc was saying, happy to read that risky is categorized with good and with opportunity. And I guess that what you just showed as well is that indeed we might see non-risky as the way to go. So if we can find a safe bet, we are going to go for the safe bet. But at the same time, risky might be where the best returns or the best opportunities lie. I don't know if you have something to comment on that.
Yes, yeah, so I think something maybe I have to do give something like a disclaimer. Yeah? I don't want to say like to perceive, for example, also the current crisis as an opportunity is a right way, or to see it as a threat. I think we all have our very good reasons to see the one or the other way. What I would like to just put out is also like that, yeah, we can maybe influence it somehow in the way we think about things, and also the whole decision-making process. It is just normal that we have our own personal biases, but still, by realizing that we have these biases, we might come to a better solution, or better outcome by thinking twice and asking ourselves, is this really the right motivation to go for it, or is there maybe another way to look at these things? So, and I think that also came another comment. I will maybe just quickly check the, wait a moment. The chat, is there another? Oh no, so
no, that's
sorry, it popped up again. Okay, good. So, well, I think I could continue like for ages and hours to talk about the different biases that we might have in every single step of our decision-making process. But yeah, I'm happy to talk about it later, or if you want in another session. But these are maybe also very bad news, but I would like to give you also some good news. And there are a lot of techniques and ways to overcome these biases. And I think the first step is to really be aware of the bias. And to address this. Carine, you will go into the details of one very specific technique. I would like to just give you one other technique on how to overcome it, to talk about one of these techniques, also especially because we received a lot of questions that went into this direction up front. And here it is really like about teamwork and asking others for advice. Yeah. So if we make the decision within a team, then we can really embrace and empower diversity. So there's really the power of diversity. And the power of diversity is not about having as much people around as possible, but it's really about the pool of resources. It's a pool of different viewpoints, a pool of different expertise, different education, different viewpoints that might help us to see a problem from a lot of different angles than rather just from our, as I said at the beginning, our glasses, our own personal cognitive filters. But of course we have to be careful, yeah, because the others might also have their biases. And also in our selection process of the team, we might have our biases. Yeah. So just an example, if you ask your best friend whether you should accept a new job in Vancouver, he or she might answer this out of her or his perspective, yeah, and not out of your job perspective, but rather saying like, oh no, I want you to be very close to me, or oh, great, it's an opportunity to travel to Vancouver, go for the job, although maybe they think that it's not a very good job. Yeah. And again, we might have our expert bias, gender bias, and so on. We might again have a confirmation bias. So sometimes we can learn a lot about ourselves when we ask ourselves, why do I want to have this or that person in my team? Why do I enjoy working with him or her? Maybe it's just because this person is very, very similar to ourselves. We share the same viewpoint, we share the same opinion. And then again, we would be biased, confirmation bias, like saying, yeah, he says the same or she says the same, and we share the same viewpoint. This is why it is correct. But by just adding more and more people with the same viewpoint, it does not mean that this is a correct view. Yeah? So it's a social proof bias also, like everybody's saying this is why it needs to be correct. No, it's rather about identifying maybe the one person that has a completely different viewpoint, and in putting your firm, your team together and really going for diversity, you rather should look for people with a completely different background, with a completely different viewpoint, those that are critically challenging your viewpoints or your assumptions. But again, I would like to come back also to the quote that Martin shared in the first live chat: speed trumps perfection, and diversity is a double-edged sword. So yes, we will come to better solutions due to the different viewpoints, due to the different resources, the pool of resources. But of course, decision-making takes longer if we try to incorporate all the different viewpoints. So what my suggestion would be, yes, go for diversity, try to make up your decision in a team, try to enclose all the different viewpoints, but set yourself a deadline and yeah, try to come to an end of your discussions and don't discuss for the rest of the year. And yeah, as I said, as we said in the very first seminar, speed trumps perfection. So this is more or less what I wanted to share with you. And I think there was another, was there something in the chat box again?
Yeah, there is another comment in the chat box. Kerstin, maybe you can address that one while I'll just pull out my slides then to continue.
Allow me, yeah, not to be 100% agreement, this is perfectly, because it's what I just said, yeah. So we don't want to have people that are 100% in agreement. So I would agree that being aware of possible bias is interesting, but I cannot agree that outcome is considered as merely a bias. What comes in my word? Yes, yeah, I fully agree. Yeah, this is what I also said or wanted to express, is we cannot overcome all our biases. Yeah, and it is also just at the moment of decision making, we have to ask ourselves, did we think about possible bias? And there are so many more biases. And then at the end, you might be also like a victim of this knowledge that you have biases. Yeah, so it's just rather that we should always critically think about it and again, as you said, like at the end, it's a sound one. Yeah, exactly. I fully agree. Now I fully agree. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Kerstin. So allow me to continue on this idea of what can we do? So we have biases. Basically, we know we have to take decisions about the future of our strategies. We know that we are human beings, so we are going to be biased. And we also know that, well, COVID-19 probably bring even more uncertainties that we are normally used to deal with. So now what do we do? And maybe some of you would argue that we can simply forget about strategy and strategic planning. Actually, we got some comments in that direction in preparation for the meeting. Now, I would say I would not forget about strategy entirely, and I'm going to come back to that point, and I hope I can convince you of that. But I would definitely question and try to change the process of strategy making. And by that, I mean especially one of those very deeply rooted habit that we have, which is basically to try to predict the future. I think, Kerstin, you said it as well. Very often when we are trying to take a strategic decision, what we do is that we try to think about what is the future going to bring, and based on that, well, try to make as few mistakes as we can, and just base the future of our company based on what we think the future is going to be. Now, I think there is just no way we can predict what the future will bring, and especially in this kind of very uncertain times. And we also got a lot of questions about so what is this crisis going to bring for one or another industry? Are we going to really see a significant shift in customer or consumer preferences? Are we going to go for local or global economy? I do very much understand why we have those questions, and I think we should ask ourselves those questions. But when it really comes to defining the future of strategy, there are all other questions we should ask, which is more about what are really the uncertainties we're facing, and we should work hard to try to understand those uncertainties, but understand those uncertainties not as a way to then just settle on one outcome that we believe with all our biases is going to be the most likely outcome, but more as a way to make those uncertainties part of the planning process. And how to do that? Well, by turning the uncertainties in different possible scenarios of what the future could look like. Now, this is kind of the promise of scenario mapping. So stop trying to predict what the future is going to bring. We don't know, so let's just accept that and make those uncertainties part of the different scenarios that we're going to consider for the future. And so once again, I would like to start from your experiences, and actually, do you already today use scenarios when you think about what your strategy may look like for the future? This is the question I would like to ask you in this very quick poll. So just yes, no, or maybe you just don't know. Does your organization today already use scenarios to define, or help define the strategy for the day after? See, we have almost all the votes. So I think we do have a clear picture. I'm going to end the poll and share the results. So the majority in the room says yes, or at least we have 50% of you saying yes, we do already use scenarios. So that's a very good news. There might be some nice experiences that you can share with us as to how you do that. Because actually what I would like to address next as a question is that yes, you do use scenarios, but which kind of scenarios do you use, and what do you do with your scenarios once you have produced once you have created your stories? Because the point is that there are different types of scenarios, and there are the scenarios that I would maybe refer to as a la McKinsey, or what Philip referred to in the previous session, this letter game. So is the recovery going to take a U shape, a V shape, a L shape, a W shape? Those scenarios that are very useful and important, but basically focusing, in my view, on the quantity of economic activity that we can expect to see or not see in the future, and all that based on rather generic uncertainties that we all face. Now, this is very important, but I would say this is only a starting point, and this is what McKinsey themselves, they say, this is very important for you to take into account what's going to be the size of the total pie of business there will be around in the future. But especially when it comes to strategy making, I would say this is a good starting point. This will not be enough. because you will also want to look into scenarios for the nature of the business that you're going to have, and not just based on generic uncertainties that apply to all of us, but you will want to look into specific uncertainties in your respective organizations, markets, industries, or countries. So not just the size of the total pie, but what's going to be the flavor of the pie. Is it going to be lemon or strawberry in your specific industry? So if I can start out of just one example, there's been an announcement made by Cambridge University a few weeks ago saying that, well, basically all the lectures are going to happen online for the entire academic year until summer of 2021. Now the question is, can we realistically believe that after Cambridge will have lived for an entire academic year with only online lectures, they will have adapted all their processes and programs and systems and people minds to make it work, because this is Cambridge, so they will make it work? Do we realistically believe that as from 2022, things are simply going to come back exactly where they were in March 2020? Well, maybe yes, that is still an option that we will want to consider. Maybe we simply go back to the old Cambridge as it was before. But at least I would say, if I was a university, I would still want to ask myself whether, yes, there might not be something else, a more significant impact in the future of universities in terms of what they will look like in 2022. And so if you're in universities, the future of what your role might be may depend on whether, I mean, the extent of global, digital learning. It might also very much depend on the extent to which we continue to see what we have been seeing in the past few years, which is an increase in the number of students who travel because they want to take their education from a foreign institution, and we see education as a global business. And based on those uncertainties, as a university, you will want to create stories about what the future might look like for you specifically. Now, this is the case of universities. Now, in your specific business, it might be completely different uncertainties. So I would say, for me, after starting from those very high level quantity of economic activity type of scenarios, what I would encourage you to do is to think for yourself in your specific business, what are maybe the two most critical unknowns that you're facing. And if you're in the sharing economy, again, just to take a couple of examples, your Airbnb, well, probably that the future of your business is going to depend on, are we going to have enough social trust so that we are actually willing to go in completely strangers' houses, or we are willing to receive in our homes complete strangers. So what's going to be the level of social trust? And then is there anything we can do to actually influence in which direction this is going? You can think of manufacturing. If you produce goods, how important is sustainability to be for your products themselves or for your production process? So at the last chat, we heard Leonardo talk about the next new Green Deal that may save us from the current crisis. Well, if this is going to materialize, then yes, maybe sustainability is going to be much more important than it was before. But we could also imagine a scenario where the economy has collapsed and maybe efficiency and low cost is simply the most important thing. Or if you're in retail, especially if you're a small retailer, I think that we see many small retailers really trying hard to go online now, because this is the only way for them to still keep a little bit of activity. But in the long term, we may wonder what's going to happen. Will there still be room, space online for those small retailers? And if yes, which kind of a place? And what can you do as a small retailer to have your place and to prepare for that? So basically, the message is, think about your business. What are your critical uncertainties? And based on that, well, create your stories. Now, in coming up with your stories about what the future in your specific business may look like, forget about being right. In scenario mapping, there is no right or wrong. That simply does not exist, a right scenario or a wrong scenario, which is why we very often use scenario mapping as a way to overcome some of our biases, and especially what Kerstin was referring to as the outcome bias. We are afraid that we may make a mistake. Well, I can tell you that if you're doing scenario mapping and at some point in the process you don't find yourself completely silly to think about what you're actually discussing, you're probably not going far enough. So this is not about being right. There is no expert in scenario mapping, so there is no expert bias because everyone is an expert around the table. There is no taboo. Also, scenario mapping is a very good tool to do what Kerstin was referring to as bring in diversity in perspectives. Don't just invite your friends to do this exercise. Make sure that you have sufficient variety of perspectives in the organization that participate in the scenario exercise. Also as a way to kind of compensate all the human biases that are going to be present in the conversation. And maybe just two last one about that. Make it stick. The worst thing that could happen if you do that is that you invest a lot in building those scenarios and then they end up in the drawer somewhere in the organization. No, you want them to be used by the people when they have to make decisions about their own work, their own department and teams. So make them stick. So use even the titles of the scenarios, I would say, find a way to make them memorable so they will be used by the people. They will touch their heart. And lastly, but probably certainly not least, think about the drivers. What is it that would lead us to go towards one or another scenario? Why would universities and why would education evolve towards more of an Amazon learning type of scenario where it's global and fully online versus my teacher at home where it's still fully online but much more of a local experience? You have to identify and understand those drivers underlying the scenarios, because again, as I said, the goal is to use the scenarios. You want to make them live in your organization. You want to leverage those scenarios. And there are all kinds of different ways you can do that. I'm certainly not going to go into the details, but I would say that for me, the most basic thing you can do and you should do when you do scenario mapping is to identify what is it that you should monitor in the future. And how are you going to go about monitoring those drivers of your scenarios? Because when you build scenarios, it's always about the future, but you're today. And so something needs to happen between today and the future. And what needs to happen? Well, the minimum thing is that you monitor those key uncertainties and the scenarios, understanding the drivers. This is going to help you identify what do I need to put in my monitoring system and what kind of monitoring system do I need to have in place. And so that's my kind of last and sixth way to leverage scenarios. And another one is a very typical one, is the first one that I have here, is to use scenarios as a way to stress test your current strategy. So just imagine now you're projecting yourself in each one of the scenarios that you have built. You take your current strategy and you confront your strategy of today with those scenarios that you have created. Are there major holes that you can identify, really major risks that you will want to mitigate? But there might also be new opportunities that you see. And some of them might be safe bets because they are valid in all scenarios. Other ones might be a bit less sure. So you may not want to invest big money at first, but at least start experimenting with. Also, I think we all have questions, and we saw that as well before. Okay, what do we need to push? What do we need to stop? What do we need to reallocate our resources for? Can we have a process to help us make those decisions? And this is really where having those scenarios and bringing those scenarios in the conversation can help you, well, not clear the uncertainties will remain, but at least you will have material to think, and as much as possible avoid that all the decisions are driven just by one individual or a couple of individuals' biases. And now I would like maybe to go back to my original question. But my original question was, do you use scenarios to think about your future strategy? My refined question would be about, do you use strategic scenarios? And by strategic scenarios, I mean those scenarios where you don't just look at the quantity of business that may be around for your organization, but you look at the nature, what kind of demand, what kind of customers are you going to face in the future, and what are the nature of the opportunities. So let me just launch the last polls to see about strategic scenarios. Is that also something that you already use widely in your companies? There it is.
We received also 2 comments in the chat box. I don't know whether you're able to check it while you're launching the poll, but
so economic only. Yeah. A technique named pre-mortem analysis used in project management, which can also be used in strategy. Definitely. I would definitely see pre-mortem analysis as also one way to overcome some of the kind of very positive biases that we have, especially the ones for successful organizations where we have the impression that our success is simply going to go on forever. I would definitely use pre-mortem. I think scenario for me is a more complete approach because it's not just only about, okay, you're in a positive mood and let's try to put yourself in a negative mood and see what could go wrong. To me, it's more complete, but it's definitely along the same line as pre-mortem analysis when it comes to trying to make us think in a different way than we would normally do. So definitely, Clément. So let me show the results now, which are a little bit more mixed than we had before, but still I see many of you, 43% of you actually using those strategic scenarios, so going beyond just the quantity of business. So please, if any of you in the room has some experience to share, we still have 2 minutes, do not hesitate. And for those of you who do not currently use those scenarios, well, I hope this will have brought you some new perspective or new ideas as to how you could actually do something with those uncertainties that you face, instead of simply, well, pretending they do not exist because we don't know quite what to do with them. So thank you for sharing that. I have to check the chat box where I see new. Oh. I will download your image later today. So I guess you actually did some nice scenario exercise. I think it's time to close the session. So Kerstin, I will let you maybe summarize your 2 main messages of today.
Yes, and well, I'm exactly. So, yeah, I think I would like to come back to what we really said at the beginning, and also related to the content we received. It is more about the decision-making process. It should be a sound process, but don't evaluate the outcome of your decision. Yeah, so try to make a really like a sound process by identifying your own biases, critically challenge them. If you accept them and say it's still okay, but critically challenge them, and ask others for advice might help you to critically challenge all your assumptions. And yeah, and maybe also you can keep in your mind, or what I would like to encourage you to is this opportunity or threat perception. And not only to the industry, we will see a lot of differences. Maybe we already started to see it now, but we will see it later on as well. Different ways of handling the current situation also within an industry, and this is highly dependent from our individual factors. Yeah, because at the end we are all beings and we make the strategic decisions.
Thank you, Kerstin. And I guess for me, you got the point that I would like you to be honest that no one here around has a crystal ball to see the future. So let's accept that we cannot predict. And instead of that, let's try to make use of those uncertainties, understand them, make them part of the process. And when we build scenarios, we should look at the quantity of business, but also the nature of the business that is going to be around. And that would be our strategic scenarios. And with this, I guess we have come to the end of our series of live chats. Thank you all of you for participating in one or more of our sessions. Thank you for your challenging questions and for sharing some of your experiences. Also, thank you to my colleague for having joined me into this initiative. It was very nice to do that. I hope you were inspired with some new thinking and food for thought to also use in your companies. And if you know more, well, we have a web page entirely dedicated to online programs that we run at Vlerick, and you will see that we have quite a few of them. So if you want to use the summer to refresh your skill in any topic, you'll probably find something for you. And we also have a dedicated page with our strategy programs, whether online or on-site. So you may also find interest in some of those. But as I said before, but I will never repeat it again, do not hesitate to reach out. We would love to also continue the conversation and learn more about your challenges, your topics of interest when it comes to strategy. And with that, I will again thank you all, wish you a very good evening, stay well, stay safe, and we all hope that we will get the chance to meet again on another occasion in the future. Thank you.